Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder here at Boomer Consulting, and with me today is Arianna Campbell. Hi, Arianna. Thanks for being on this episode of the podcast.
Hi, Jon. Thanks for the invitation. Glad to be here.
And it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Arianna is a shareholder and one of our consultants here at Boomer, and among other things, really specializes in working with organizations around process improvement. And, Arianna, you've been in this space for many, many years, and you've seen an evolution take place around how firms are thinking about process improvement. And that's going to be the theme of our conversation today, is the evolution of process improvement. So the first question I kind of want to tee up for you is, why is it important for firms to kind of understand the past, present, and future of process improvement?
Well, I think it's important to understand those different aspects because it helps firms to really get alignment right now of where they're going in the future. So if we can understand where we've been when it comes to process improvement, that helps us to, maybe avoid future mistakes or leverage things that we learned from that. Then we need to know what the things are that we need to be focused on right now so that we can really be in a good position for the future, because we always want to keep in mind that the decisions we're making today really create the trajectory for where we're going to be in the future. So there's some important considerations for that when it comes to process improvement.
Right. And because you work with so many organizations, I know probably just in a one-day period, you can have conversations with firms around process improvement. And some firms are really stuck in the past. Some firms are really pushing forward into the future. And there's kind of a mix of everywhere in between. So I think that kind of explanation you had is really relevant. So talk to us about the evolution of process improvement. What are you seeing that is evolving in this space?
So it's been something that has really been interesting to me as I've kind of been taking a step back and looking at, what are the lessons that can be learned from what firms are doing within process improvement, and also how it aligns with our, really focus of helping firms to be successful and future ready. When we think about future ready, what happened or what you would need to do to be future ready, a couple of years ago is not what you need to do to be future ready today. And that's the same thing when it comes to the process improvement space. So recently, or when you think about process improvement, what you used to always hear is the word efficiency, right? And firms saying, we need to focus on our processes and streamlining our processes so that we can be more efficient. And while efficiency is a really important piece of process improvement, we are hearing so much more now about two aspects of it. So the consistency piece, because when you think about process improvement, it's the combination of efficiency and consistency. Previously, we were hearing more conversation around efficiency, and that was the buzzword. Now we're really seeing firms make a concerted effort at being more consistent. And that's because of the way that technology and process intersect. Firms are really seeing in real life that if their processes aren't consistent, they're not able to leverage automation in the way that they need to ultimately create more capacity in their processes. And I would say that that's also the second part to it. So that emphasis on consistency, but now firms are really beginning with the end in mind when it comes to process improvement and making plans and strategies for what they're going to do with the capacity or bandwidth that they create so that they can align that with their strategic plan. So it's very focused and intentional with that focus on consistency and then designing a plan for what they're going to do with the capacity they gain.
Okay. And so in the intro to this podcast, I said 20 minutes or less. You and I both know we could talk about consistency and capacity in a multi-day workshop with firms. And actually you do that. But so I have a lot of questions for you, on this. Let's first talk about the consistency piece. Okay. The other day I was working with a partner group. Now, this organization has everyone within the same building, but the partner group is 14 individuals. And there were so many inconsistent processes at the partner level. But then you even think about multi-office firms and the inconsistency you see there, and how that really kind of throttles their ability to be as efficient and as effective as they could be. Speak to us a little bit about what you're seeing in that consistency or inconsistency space with firms.
I am seeing a lot of opportunity that's created in unexpected spaces. So when we think about those things that you've talked about, the inconsistencies when it comes to the way that the partner group is doing the work, and then when you really look at that on a larger scale across the firm, one of the biggest challenges is with personal preferences, because usually when it comes to inconsistency, it's because of personal preferences. And, when you think about that, they aren't always necessarily, malicious in intent. It's just that people have been doing things a certain way for a certain amount of time. And, in your example about the partner group, one partner may not even know that another partner does things a specific way because they don't do work for each other. But what it's creating, and it's an interesting dynamic from the talent perspective, is a need for crucial conversations around reducing personal preferences and really setting aside some of the things that you've held near and dear over the years, and in some cases, many years, and being able to really focus on what's best for the firm instead of what's best for the individual. But this is taking conversations that maybe haven't been had before, right? Because again, what is the ultimate goal when it comes to consistency is being able to leverage automation. And the way that we do that is through having a consistent process that can be replicated using our technology. But that first step is, really revamping the process to make sure that we can do that. So people usually aren't expecting, when they talk about, process improvement, that it's going to lead to crucial conversations. But I find that the firms that can do that effectively and have those conversations and focus on what's best for the firm and the client when it comes to process are the ones that are more successful and then able to take advantage of the results.
And what you described there, Ariana, I would say is kind of the core explanation of why consistency is so important. But you and I both know all the ripple effects that happen within an organization because of this inconsistency. You and I had the pleasure the other day of working together on a client experience project, and the client experience, if it's inconsistent from a client perspective, across multiple partners or across, multiple offices, that is damaging to your firm's ability to build a brand, to kind of build the type of experience you want to create. It also has huge ripple effects on pricing, right? That firm I mentioned the other day that I was working with, they even told me, they said, hey, depending on who the prospect calls, if they call three different partners, they'll get three different prices, right? Now, why is that? And that's because of the inconsistency in place that you described of some of those core processes. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here for you, Ariana, because you see this firsthand daily and weekly within firms. But let's turn our attention to the capacity piece. I love what you said about, hey, when we start these process improvement projects now, we are starting with the end in mind. What are we going to do as a team, as a firm, with this newfound capacity that we will be creating? So let's already kind of put ourselves mentally there so we can make sure we're focused on the right things. What are you seeing firms do with that increased capacity?
Well, one thing that I touch on first is just the conversation itself around what is the vision for the capacity. again, firms before used to be focused on for the goals of, let's make sure that we're seeing increases in, realization. And while realization may still be a metric that's being looked at, it's not one of the primary goals that we're seeing anymore. The goals are much bigger than that, because the opportunity with process improvement is so much bigger, especially going back to some of the things that we talked about with capacity. So having that discussion with a cross-functional team about what would you do if you had more capacity. So, when we're thinking about that, the word I also like to use is bandwidth, because it's not just time, it's money, it's resources. The word capacity is multifaceted. So having that conversation and really getting an understanding from a cross-functional group of what opportunities that would create for them is a conversation that we need to be having within our firms, because that's what drives the buy-in for process improvement. When you begin with the end in mind, you're like, if we push through and really stay focused in doing this project, here are the things that we can take advantage of on the other side. That really builds the momentum, because process improvement is hard. If it's easy, that's probably means you're not doing it right. Process improvement is hard. And so really leading with that vision is key, and making sure that you have representation from different levels in the firm, and creating that vision is really going to help with buy-in. So when I'm working with a firm, I always like to tell them that, the project is an important piece of this, but it's just a milestone. It's not the end game. And what we really want to make sure that we're doing is focusing on what they're going to do with that capacity, because if you don't have a plan for it, chances are you're just going to keep doing more of what you've always done. So it's exciting to hear the things that firms then start talking about. Something that's been a common theme is around what they're going to do with their technology, data, and analytics, and really being able to provide more insights for their client. So they say if we have more capacity, we would focus on that. Business development is another area, not just business development at the top, business development at all levels. If our people weren't spending all their time, being consumed by these convoluted processes, then we would take their additional capacity and help with business development. Focus on client experience, like you mentioned earlier. If we had more capacity, we would really focus on providing that holistic, consistent client experience across the firm. So as people start talking about those things and seeing those opportunities, the excitement starts to grow, the commitment starts to grow. And again, it really goes back to by thinking about the capacity and beginning with the end in mind, it helps to just really keep that momentum going for the initiative.
And I think one reason it's so exciting, um, and again, I know you get to experience this pretty regularly, is when you have people talk about what they could be doing with their capacity. Oftentimes, they start talking about things that maybe are more in line with their passion, right? And so they start to see kind of a door opening of, wow, this process improvement kind of initiative and strategy is really a door opening for me, so I can spend more time with really what I'm passionate about, and maybe what I'm really, you know, good at doing as well. And so I love that you start kind of those projects with that in mind. It kind of gives everyone a why, to kind of rally around. So, for those listening to this podcast, hopefully they're energized based off what you're talking about, and hopefully they've been able to connect with a few of the topics that we've been discussing in this episode about how we see maybe process improvement or the lack thereof manifesting itself within firms. Some of the ripple effects, some of the great ideas that you just shared with us. If you had to give one piece of advice as we close out this conversation about a next step, what's the one thing someone should do next, when they finish listening to this podcast, if they're interested in kind of moving their firm forward in the area of process improvement?
So it might be a little bit of an unexpected answer, but I would say one of the first steps and the first places to start is with your strategic plan. So if you do not have a strategic plan for the firm that is documented and shared, that is the first place to start, because your process improvement and your plans for what you're going to do with capacity and the areas where you need to increase consistency and find efficiency needs to start with your strategic plan. So if you don't have one, that would be the first place to start, is in creating one. If you do have one, then you need to be looking at the process improvement initiatives that you need to be really doing in order to support that strategic plan. Begin with the end in mind of really, asking that question of what would you do with the capacity, and then make sure that you are focused on making those processes consistent, in addition to making them efficient, but making them consistent so that you can leverage automation and technology.
Excellent advice, Arianna. As always, it's a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for being on this episode of the Boomer Briefing podcast. And for those listeners, if you love these topics, or you love how we can pack in a lot of information within 20 minutes, and how each week we kind of rotate topics. So one week you may hear something on process improvement. Next week, it might be technology. It might be leadership, growth, talent. We like to mix up the topics to keep it fresh. Please subscribe to this podcast. That really helps us out a lot. And we release new episodes every Tuesday morning. We have not missed a Tuesday morning yet, so we are looking to keep that track record going. So please subscribe. Arianna, thanks again.
Thank you, John.